All right, good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock and the program is about to begin. So, Lieutenant Strock, to my right, is going to be doing the presentation tonight, but I just want to take a few minutes to recognize a few people in the audience and kick this program off. So first and foremost, Mayor Charles Patricelli is in the audience. I will make you stand up. Our new General Manager, Joe LaCivita, is right behind him. I have about 10 more people, so you can hold your applause. I just want to let you know. New Councilman Barbara Diamond and Councilman Pete Tornicello are here. Judge Reinfurt is in attendance. Mayor McNulty is here from Green Island. Sean Ward from the Albany County Legislature. And Chief Investigator from the District Attorney's Office, Chris D'Alessandro. David Soares. And I'm going to stop here for one moment, and I'm glad you're here. The support and guidance that you have given us, when I say us, the law enforcement community. There's 12 agencies in Albany County, and each one has a police department, and then you have state police and SUNY and a number of other agencies, federal agencies. David Soares in the District Attorney's Office has really started this conversation back in the summer. And they provided so much guidance and support to make sure that we were not only compliant January 1st, 2020, but that we were successful. So I do want to give you a round of applause for your leadership and guidance. It really, I would have been lost. And especially as a brand new chief, I do appreciate that support and guidance from the District Attorney's Office. There's another group of people here that we recently established. I'm very excited to announce this. We recently established a Chiefs Advisory Board. So I'm going to ask in a moment if everyone can stand up from the Chiefs Advisory Board. But these people are volunteers from the community who are thought partners. And that's really important in my position. They're thought partners in how we conduct business in the city of Watervliet. Because myself and the command staff may think that we have really good ideas and really good initiatives and strategies. But I need to hear from the community. So we do informal things to hear from the community. We do formal things like this forum. But we also established this Chiefs Advisory Board. And we met last week, an inaugural meeting, and we had a really good start off. We have really good work ahead of us. But if I could just have those that are part of the Chiefs Advisory Board just stand up, please. And you do deserve a round of applause for your volunteer work. So. Did I forget anyone? Me? My fan club in the front row here. All right, so this is great. So tonight's program, it's not opinion-based. I will tell you that much. We do have opinions. I have personal opinions, but I don't think they have any room in this arena. What I will say is that this reform has definitely affected us. When I say us, I mean everyone in this room. But specifically in our department, it has affected us operationally, administratively, and financially. We can point to clear impacts that these reforms, and I think by the end of the presentation, it'll be clear to you as well. The other reason why this is important, there's definitely a public safety component to this. And you have every right to be worried and concerned for a number of reasons. So we want to make sure that we address those concerns. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Brian Strock, who's going to do a presentation. This is a conversation and is a discussion. So I don't want just to talk to you. If we come upon a certain slide or information, please ask. We do have a number of subject matter experts, including the District Attorney's Office here in attendance, that can help us out. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. So as the Chief mentioned, my name is Brian Strock. I'm a lieutenant here with the Watervliet Police Department. I was actually born and raised in the city of Watervliet. Graduated, I walked right across the stage a couple years ago. I started my law enforcement career with the Albany County Sheriff's Department. I worked for them for 4 years. Then I transferred out of there and went to the city of Troy. I was a Troy police officer for about 11 years. And then I came back to my hometown to Watervliet back in 2015. And I am here now in front of you guys to discuss criminal justice reforms. Like the Chief said, this is a fact-based presentation. A majority of what you're seeing here is what we taught to our police officers a couple weeks ago before January 1 deadline hit. So we kind of took their presentation and modeled it so that you guys can get the same information that our police officers got as well. So it's about an hour and a half. I'm hoping I can keep it to an hour and a half for this. So please, if If you have to use the restroom, if you have questions, just raise your hand, just get up and leave. I swear I won't get upset if I see people getting up and walking out. I understand. But some housekeeping rules. Our emergency exits, here comes my flight attendant. So you got to point with two fingers, right? You have exits up front, you got exits in the back. Bathrooms are in the hallway out there, so we are not going to stop. Just get up and go use your restroom if you need to. If you need to stretch your legs, same thing. And then again, with questions, please, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Simply raise your hand. If I don't see you, just take your shoe and throw it at me, and I'll stop. We can go from there. So, exactly what are we going to cover tonight? Well, we're going to cover the purpose of the criminal justice reforms. We're going to cover the major components of the reforms. And then lastly, and we're going to spend a majority of our conversation about how this is impacting specifically our department here in the city of Watervliet. So with the budget, when the budget was passed last year, the New York State budget was passed last year, it included legislation that dramatically transformed our bail system, our arrest procedures, our civil forfeiture rules, our speedy trial rules, other components of the criminal justice system. It was really the first major overhaul of the criminal justice system since the 1970s. So needless to say, this is pretty overwhelming it's pretty drastic changes for it. We have to, well, you'll see. So what the purpose of the reforms were, it was expected that it was going to provide a greater openness within the criminal justice community. And in addition, it gave very specific time frames for sharing evidence between the prosecution, the DA's office, and the defense. The reason why is our legislatures felt that they wanted to help facilitate a defendant's ability to prepare a defense, and then they also wanted to shrink case processing times in hopes that if defendants were in jail, that they would not have to stay in jail for long periods of time. An interesting note, when I was doing some research on this, the governor's office projected that with these reforms, approximately 90% of the cases where people were charged or are going to be charged but not yet convicted would remain out of jail before their day in court. So when you boil that down, 9 in 10 people will never see a jail cell before their conviction. And that's from the governor's office. Once these effects, the projection is that 9 in 10 people will never see a jail cell before their conviction. So what did it do when these reforms went into effect on January 1? It repealed and replaced the existing laws in New York State, and it also created a new criminal procedure law, Article 245, and we'll talk briefly about what's in that article, what's included in that article. So that's kind of the purpose of the legislation. When we get into the major components of it, there's really 4 major components of what was passed, what was in the legislation. There's something called discovery rules, which we'll go over, bail reform. There's also forfeiture rules and speedy trial rules. When we talk about forfeiture, we're talking about how we changed, or how the legislation now has changed the way we can confiscate cash or confiscate other property if we believe that it was used in the commission of a crime or received received because of illicit activities. It changed how we can take that property away from defendants. And then the speedy trial rules, it's mandated that courts now have to reduce unnecessary delays. For today's purposes, we're really going to focus on discovery and bail reform. I'm not going to talk a lot about forfeiture and speedy trials. So we talk about discovery and bail reform. Really, we're going to break it down even further. We're going to talk about something called automatic discovery. We're going to talk about qualifying offenses. Appearance ticket rules have changed. We're going to really dive into those 2 categories, and we're going to get right into it. Automatic discovery. So with this new legislation, it eliminated the defense attorney from having to make requests for certain things from the prosecution. So, in other words, prior to January 1, so last year, what would happen is the defense attorney would have to make a motion requesting discovery. They had to ask the district attorney's office, we want to see everything in your case file. And the district attorney would have a period of time where they could provide that information. That doesn't happen anymore. It is now automatic. Every time we make an arrest, we have to automatically provide that information to the defense attorney. So that's when we talk about automatic discovery, and we're going to talk specifically about what information we do have to provide to the defense in a couple slides here. We talk about discovery. We also talk about that there's very specific timelines. So like I mentioned, when we have to now turn over our information to the defense, we have 15 days to do that. You say, 15 days is a lot of time. When you see a slide I put up here in a couple minutes, you're going to realize that 15 days is really not a lot of time. Plea offers, the new legislation changed how the prosecution, how the DA's office can offer dispositions for certain cases. So defendants are no longer required to have to plead without knowledge of evidence against them, which is a good thing, in my opinion. But the issue that we run into with this is there are very big cases out there that we need to provide all the evidence to the defense prior to the prosecution from even offering a plea deal to them. And again, as we go through this presentation, you're going to see how this presents a problem for our little agency here in Watervliet. Again, reciprocal discovery. One of the things that this new legislation built into it is reciprocal discovery. What that means is the defense must turn over certain evidence to the district attorney's office. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. This is a big hot topic item, something called an order to access premises. Excuse me. The defense counsel can now request to access a crime scene. This is something new, and it actually was just in the paper recently. I don't know if anybody was following. It was the defendant was Brian Angelo. That's a DJ case out of County. It allegedly raped a 12-year-old little girl, and the defense counsel made a request to visit the crime scene, which was a local DJ studio up in County, and the judge granted access. So the defense counsel, not the defendant, but the defense counsel was able to go and actually view the crime scene. It's the first case, I believe, in Albany County of someone utilizing this part of the new legislation. But essentially what can happen is the defense counsel can request to come and visit the crime scene. A judge has to make a rule. And when a judge makes this rule, he has to consider three things while making this ruling. He has to consider the need to access. He or she has to consider the privacy interests of the victim. And then the judge also has to consider the prosecution's position regarding that request. And if approved, if the judge says yes, I grant access to the crime scene. The one thing that's built into the law that protects victims is that the property owner can request that a police officer accompany the defense into their crime scene, into their property. Any questions on that? I know that's a... Sorry, yes, sir.
Technically, let's say if somebody was defending themselves, they could ask to go back to your house?
In theory, yeah. No?
Yeah, the statute allows for, let's say someone burglarizes your home.
Right.
If the defense defense attorney for that defendant makes an application to the court to go back to your home, a judge can in fact grant that.
But
So you would have
somebody
to,
can't say, I want to defend myself and go back to your house.
well, if, for example, defendants have the right to either hire counsel or represent themselves. So you can
Right.
have a burglar who burglarizes your house, who represents themselves, who can make that application to the court, who then can go back to the house if there is an issue of substance in the house that they want to use in their defense.
So they can't.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes.
Will the victim also have the right to argue in court against the judge allowing that to occur?
Well, this is part of the reason why I think every law enforcement member and every single district attorney, 62 of us throughout the state, vehemently shouted at the governor, at the legislature as well, to not include this because this is going to add greater trauma to victims, specifically in cases that are the most underreported, that being rape, domestic violence. These cases are underreported because the process, although we've tried over the last 20 years to make it a warmer process, it's still a very intrusive process. The idea of having to sit in a courtroom with strangers and articulate something that's deeply personal. So we view this as a second level of trauma that people would be experiencing, and we weren't listened to.
Was there another question? I appreciate you guys asking these questions. This is what we want. We want that community interaction. We want those questions to be asked. So thank you. Thank you for breaking the ice. Qualifying offenses, so when we talk about bail reform, we're going to talk about qualifying offenses. I'm really going to get involved in that a little bit later in this presentation. I'll explain that a little bit better. This is huge. The new legislation eliminated what was called police bail. It eliminated police officers, it eliminated giving police officers the ability to utilize their discretion and ask the defendant to provide bail in lieu of their release. So, in other words, we make an arrest. The officers had there was already set standards that an officer can ask for certain amounts of money in order for a person, in order to ensure that a person would return to court. It completely eliminated that. Police officers are no longer allowed to accept cash bail. And then when we talk about bail reform, there's new appearance ticket rules. So we've eliminated police bails, meaning I can't ask for someone to give me money to ensure that they come to court. And we've also set new rules on appearance tickets. So I'm mandated to release them on appearance tickets. There's new rules that kind of get tied into that. And again, we'll go into that a little bit later. So this is where we're going to spend a majority of our presentation on the impacts that are felt here in the city of Watervliet and with our partners at the DA's office. Really, the biggest challenge is complying with these new discovery and bail reform rules. Our agency has met with the district attorney's agencies countless number of times leading up to January 1, and we're still actually meeting with them pretty regularly to make sure that we are doing our best job to be compliant with these new rules and regulations. But still, there are some challenges, and we'll present those to you in this presentation. So when we talk about discovery, what exactly is discovery? And this is a part where we're actually going to show you what we need to do to be compliant with these new with the new legislation. And I'm going to go over this very in depth. So with discovery, yes, sir.
If I just,
Not at all. Go back.
so, just to explain to you what discovery is, and be in a position where you have to explain things, right? It's like I'd rather watch, not even watch, I'd rather listen to paint dry than listen to some of the things that our law professors taught us and
Yes, sir.
from the academy. Discovery if you think about it, it's just the right for a person who stands accused of a crime to discover what is in the files of the police as well as the district attorney's office, right? Now, here's what I'm prepared to admit to you tonight. I'm prepared to admit this tonight. I was admitting this 20 years ago, but these are the steps that historically have been abused by us, right? We're having to pay the consequences for the sins of our fathers. There were prosecutors who 20 years ago, 30 years ago, practiced in a way where they wouldn't hand material over to the defense until there was a hearing, or maybe the day of trial, or the day before trial. And I think all of us in this room who have a sense of what fairness, justice, and equity really means, I think all of us would agree that that's really not appropriate, right? Over the last, I'd say, 20 years, we've had judges that are more stringent in making sure that we provide this material early on in the process. In Albany County, because of your law enforcement community, in our office, we practice what's called open discovery. So open discovery means that whenever I get a document, I'm just making a copy and turning it over. And the idea of open discovery is the sooner we provide information to defense counsel, and the better the conversation that defense counsel can have with the defendants, the quicker we can arrive at a plea that would save a lot of time, energy, and resources, right? And so in Albany County, we practice open discovery, and it's benefited everybody. It's benefited us, it's benefited the defense, benefited the defendant who receives a better deal up front than he would after. But that's Albany County. We're 1 out of 62. There are places in the state of New York that still function in a very traditional way. And so I think all of us could agree and do agree that we've needed reform. We've needed to fix this. And there simply isn't an excuse, right? Now, before we go on, let me just talk about Amazon for a second. You remember Jeff Bezos? Amazon? Okay. So can you imagine what life was like for Jeff Bezos, right? He goes into board meetings where he's looking for investors, and he's saying, hey, listen, we're going to eliminate supermarkets. We're going to make sure that everything is available through a click of a button. And by the way, we'll get it there in 2 days. Now, what do you think a lot of those investors said to this man? They said it's impossible, right? But what did he do? If you make sure you have the right infrastructure, right, and you make significant investments where you strategically place your truck stops, right, and you have certain places all throughout the country, what was impossible can soon be possible, right? Because I just ordered coffee from New Orleans that came to my house yesterday, thank God, right? So it's not that things are impossible. Things can be possible with the right kind of investment. What you're going to learn today is that the entire structure of the criminal justice system is scrapped. They call it reform. We call it reimagining. They reimagined the criminal justice system. So what they did was they created, at least on paper, Amazon without investing at all in infrastructure. So when you see either my face on television or your chief who's talking about this and it appears as though we're complaining, let's understand that we're not necessarily complaining about the substance of what reform is. We're complaining because they're trying to get us to turn everything over and provide 2-day delivery without any trucks, without any additional, and it's just, it's a disservice. It's a disservice to the defense bar, it's a disservice to defendants, and it's a disservice to victims, it's a disservice to law enforcement, and those of us who are in the system. But we'll get into more of the details.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard a recent quote, and the criminal justice system in New York needed to take an aspirin, but we didn't need to take the whole bottle of aspirin, and that's exactly what happened here. So we're going to talk about discovery. This is what we are telling our police officers that we have to provide to the district attorney's office, and this was actually provided to us by the district attorney's office. We need to provide names and adequate contact information for any persons who have relevant information regarding the case. We need to provide name and work affiliation of all LEOs, that's an abbreviation for law enforcement officers, that have worked on that case or have evidence of that case. We have to provide any statements, whether or not they're even used by us, we still have to provide those statements. We have to provide electronic recordings, which include 911 calls. We have to provide materials favorable to the defense, which is also known as Brady materials. Rewards, promises, inducements offered to witnesses. So if our detectives here said, offered something, hey, you cooperate with us, we'll reduce your charge. We have to make that knowledgeable. We have to let everybody know about that within the case. Search warrants, all related materials. Any electronically created or stored information. We have to provide photos. We have to provide any tangible items that were allegedly possessed by the defendant. All police reports and notes. I'm kind of going through this quick because I boil it down into this, right? Think of it as a shopping cart. We have all of our paperwork in our department. All of our paperwork surrounding a case. We have to take that. We have to take our station video. So if we make an arrest, we have video within the station, our booking video. We have surveillance video. We have audio tapes. We record our arrest for several reasons. We have to take that station video because it's electronic recordings. We have to take any of our street video. If an arrest occurred on 19th Street, which has cameras going up and down that street, pretty much everything on 19th Street is captured on camera footage. We have to take that street camera footage. We have to take any surveillance footage. If it happened inside a price chopper, we have to grab that surveillance footage of that arrest. 911 calls. We have to grab the audio recordings of all 911 calls. Any radio transmissions. If I pick up the radio and say, hey, come over here, there's a bad guy, I have to capture that. I have to preserve that evidence. Any photos, any evidence, are my training records, my certifications to do certain things. I have to provide that. I have to take all that information, throw it in a shopping cart. And then I got to deliver that shopping cart to the district attorney's office. So this is a great image. This is a good visual to kind of understand it. That's us up there. That's our police department. We make an arrest, right? We capture an arrest. We build our shopping cart. We put everything in our shopping cart. Then we got to digitize it all. We got to take everything that's in our shopping cart and we got to scan it. We got to put it all in a computer system. And then we got to send it from our police station through a fiber optic network down to the district attorney's office in downtown Albany. Now the district attorney's office has to take all that digital information, they have to put it into their computer system, and then it gets to their attorneys, and to our district attorneys, our ADAs. Sir, you're going to steal my thunder.
No, just to give you an example, because the shopping cart analogy is it's very perfect for this example. So, how many people watch CSI or other crime shows? Okay. I love those shows. I don't watch them anymore because it's frustrating, okay? So Law and Order, 9:10, a crime is committed. By 9:20, they Briscoe, they get the suspect, depending on which season you watch, right? By 9:30, Jack is, opening his opening statements. By 9:50, we have a confession that someone breaking down on the stand and then the show is done, right? CSI, the same way. I actually watched one episode one time, refused to ever watch it again, when on the body of a victim they find a library card, and they were able to use a library from a computer. They reached into the library database, saw what other books this guy did, what other people checked out, and before the end of the show they had the guy that does not exist. It doesn't exist. There's no place other than Hollywood that exists. And the reason I'm making this point is very important to the overall point that's being made. He talked about body footage, body cams. Anybody here believe that body cams is a good idea? This guy believes body cams is a great idea. Anybody here believe the dash cams on cars are a good idea? This guy right here believes that it's a great idea. Here's what happens. If one police officer arrives at a crime scene, right, you're going to get body camera footage because the moment that they get there, it's on. If that scene, if all the events take an hour, all of it is recorded. So it's recorded here, and it's also recorded in your car. Okay? Now, how many times have you seen a crime scene with more than one squad car? Probably more often than not, right? So what you have are multiple cars, multiple bodies, and multiple hours of video that you have to review. And you have to review for everybody. Even if the guy shows up 2 minutes and takes off, you have to review that body cam. So, Have you ever downloaded any video from any cloud-based system? How long does it take? I've grown facial hair. I've grown facial hair watching for that bar to get thicker, right? Knowing that this thing is downloaded. So, for the highest speed cloud-based system, fiber actually works a whole lot better than the cloud. So he has to download body cams from the cloud to his system and then place it into the fiber to get to our office. For a 2-hour video, it took us 4 hours to download. Okay? Now, why this is important is all of these things have to be put in that shopping cart to be delivered. But the amount of manpower, because I think we get lost in the technology, right? We always talk about technology, but it's more of a workflow. It's a manpower issue. Who are you hiring in the Watervliet department to watch and wait for a downloaded video? And then who are we hiring in the DA's office to have that thing come so that we can review it all and then send it over? That's the part that I forgot to mention. We just don't turn it over to the defense. We have to review it. We have to make redactions, because when the police arrive and there's an 11-year-old child in the house, we can't have that 11-year-old child's face, although we have to include all of the information from that 11-year-old, right? Including that child's phone number in documents that we're turning over to defense. We have to do all of the redaction because we want to still protect the privacy interests of bystanders.
Yes, several hours worth of time waiting for just one case to get sent down there. So what's important to note is, and I think I broke it. Oh, I turned it off. There we go. So the district, we have 15 days, right? We went over this. We have 15 days to be compliant. What the district attorney's office has asked is that if we can spend 7 days for our agency to gather all that discoverable material, grab all that video, grab all those documents, get everything that we can and send it down to them within 7 days. They now, the district attorney's office now has 7 days to review everything, like he said, to watch all that video and redact what needs to be redacted and get that to the defense counsel. Not a lot of time. Oh, and I wanted to point this out. I wrote a little quote from you. And I pulled this from a newspaper article. This is from the DA source that, you know, when we talk about our discoverable material, when we talk about this, all the stuff that we used to gather, we only really need to do that in about 10 to 20% of the cases. A lot less. Previously. We only needed to gather all this stuff in about 10 to 20% of our cases prior to January 1. What's the percentage now, sir? 100%. 100% now. We have to do this with every single arrest. Every single arrest. Whether we arrest somebody for stealing a Snickers bar from Nutting's store on 14th Street to, you know, homicides. We have to treat them all the same way now. Any questions on that?
I have a question about
Yes, ma'am.
the names and addresses. I think that's one of the things that people are very
Sure.
concerned about, that if you're giving information in a criminal case, or, you know, reporting any type of criminal activity, your name is going to be associated with that case, and that criminal now, purported criminal now, has your information.
That is correct. We're going to talk about something called a discovery protection order. It's in like 2 or 3 slides.
Okay.
So I'll address that, and we'll put a pin in it, and we'll come right back to that question. Sir?
What's the implications if you go after, if it's submitted after 15 days?
So there's several, there's a word for it. There's several things that a judge can do. One of the things is, I mean, the worst case scenario is that the judge throws out the case if we're not complying with discovery. That is the worst thing that could happen. There are other remedies. There's other remedies that a judge can do. The judge can allow for more time if the prosecution makes an argument. The judge can rule that whatever evidence we didn't turn over cannot be used in future proceedings. There's a whole slew of remedies. the worst being that it can be thrown out. So, very strict, yes ma'am?
So with regard to the 15-day time frame to turn over all the evidence that you have, does that preclude you from going out and finding additional evidence after that?
So, we had I'll give you a perfect example, and then hopefully this kind of answers your question. We had a car chase that came through our city recently. I can't give you specific details, but we had a car chase came through our city. Our police officers arrested the person. We gathered all the evidence that we thought we had at the time, and we turned it over to the district attorney's office. Well, it turns out there was actually additional surveillance footage evidence. Our officers now had to go back out and grab surveillance footage from that car chase, and we have to provide that to the DA's office. So if we didn't know about it at the time, we're okay. But as soon as we realized, it starts that 15-day clock.
Okay.
That make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yep.
15 days from the time that you find out, or 15 days?
So generally speaking, we make an arrest, we have 15 days from the person's arraignment. That's when the clock starts. So we make an arrest, the person goes before the judge. When they walk out the door, that courthouse, we have 15 days to turn everything over to the defense counsel. If we don't have it with us, if we don't have knowledge of it, we're okay. But as soon as we discover knowledge of it, we have to turn that over within 15 days.
But what if it's after the 15 days?
Again, the defense counsel can make an argument in court that we were not compliant with discovery, and it will be up to the prosecutors to make arguments.
Yeah, I see Peter here too. Peter, prosecutor. So you should know that the vast majority of cases that we have, they're not done when there's an arrest. That's really the beginning of the process. There's additional investigations. In other words, if it's a drug case, those drugs are sent to labs. And so you need to give the technicians at the lab an opportunity to do the work. There's a great example of, watch the way I say, it's not a great example, but the example that I can offer you is the most recent homicide in Cohoes, where you have autopsies that need to be done. And so at the very beginning, you may have a theory of the case at the very beginning because you see that there is a person who's dead. So it is a homicide, but is it a murder or is it a manslaughter? Is it criminally negligent homicide? So you're not going to know those things until you develop the case and you get additional information. So when you make that initial discovery offering, you have an ongoing duty to continue to provide those with supplemental filings as they come in.
So to meet discovery requirements, very strict deadlines, we need to create a new internal and external workflows within our department and share those workflows with the district attorney's office. And I'll show you a slide in a minute and we'll talk about that. Keep turning this off. There we go. Discovery protection orders. So we're going to use this as an example to help explain this a little bit better. You live in a two-family house, you're on the first floor, you hear argument and you hear an obvious issue going on upstairs. Maybe it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, and it sounds very scary, and you call the police because you think somebody's getting hurt. So you call 911, and you explain to the dispatcher, I think something bad is going on upstairs. Police respond, we make an arrest. We arrest somebody from that house, and we bring them down to the police station. Well, now that we process that arrest, and through that processing, arrest processing, our officers will now pull that audio tape from you calling 911. So the information that you provided to our 911 dispatchers will at some point be turned over to the defense counsel, generally again within 15 days. What we can do as police officers is we can flag that information, and I can say to the prosecution, hey, I think we need to look into providing or getting a discovery protection order, or a DPO for short. And what the prosecution can do with valid reason, generally related to the safety of a witness or a victim, the prosecution can make an argument in court that I don't think we should release the name or contact info of this victim or witness as long as there's established good cause. And ultimately, a judge is going to be the one that makes the ruling whether or not to turn that information over to the defense. So there's a process here for a DPO. Essentially, LEOs, or law enforcement officers, we have to tell the district attorney's office, hey, I think you guys should look into not releasing information about this victim or witness. Then the prosecution has to make an application in court, so they have to go and ask the judge to look at this. Judge has to hold a hearing within 3 days of the prosecution saying, I think we don't want to release this information. And the judge has to make a decision right there and then of what they're going to do. The ruling, whatever ruling the judge makes, can be appealed. So there's a couple things that a judge can do on this. The judge can order that the material be limited to just the defense counsel viewing it. He can, or he or she can limit it so that nobody sees it. He can limit it, or he can say, you know what, the application is denied. The defendant and the defense counsel can see that information. So it's completely on the judge to make that ruling. It's important to note, though, that if the judge does make a ruling that says, hey, nobody can know this person's name other than the defense counsel, other than the defendant's attorney, the public defender will say, only the attorneys can know this person's name. And somehow we find out that the defendant got the victim or the witness's name, somebody could be arrested for what we call criminal contempt, for violating a judge's mandate. So there is some strength to that. The problem is we haven't gone through this process yet. We're not quite sure how judges are going to rule when it comes to this. Sir, do you know if any DPOs have been applied for since January 1?
Yes, we've applied for several, and we're all living in a brand new world. When I say everything's been reimagined, we're living in a brand new world. And someone here had asked a question about, or made a statement earlier about giving your name to the police and that being turned over to the alleged. Who said that?
The lady right here.
Who raised? Oh, okay. So you asked that. Let me ask you a question. If you knew that your information was going to be turned over to someone within 2 weeks of that incident, do you think you would reach out to law enforcement and file a report?
I think I'd have second thoughts.
Okay. So this is the reason why this protective order discovery, to me it makes no sense, right? And it's not an assurance by any means. If I'm talking to you, or he's talking to you and he says, look, I'm going to redact your information. I'm not turning this over until I absolutely have to. That's him giving you his guarantee, or it's me giving you my guarantee. When we're now having hearings, there's no guarantee that I can offer you at that moment, right, to provide you with the comfort that you need.
Right.
But here's why this is important, right? There are crimes, right? If it's a grand larceny, a bank robbery, these aren't going to be necessarily big issues for us, right? But we have homicides right now in the city of Albany where a person is shot, dies, in front of 20 people. And when we go there to investigate, there's no one coming forward giving us information. Do you know how we make those cases? When we can find the one person who we say, listen, I'm going to protect your identity. Just help us make this case. And they're the ones that come forward on our word, right? And and we let them know up front, if at some point in time I have to turn your information over, I'm going to put you on witness protection. I'm going to move you from your community. That's what we do. And that's how we're able to solve these cases, right? Now I'd have to tell someone, listen, if you talk to me, I'm going to apply for this, discovery protective order, and hopefully a judge is going to, see it our way and grant that. This, and I'm saying this for the record, understand this, this is going to impact different communities disproportionately. When we are unable to solve crimes in certain communities where the violence and reprisals and vengeance is real, it's going to be because of this.
Well, even in cases of domestic violence, all of that, it's,
Our animal cruelty cases, 90% of our animal cruelty cases are because that neighbor who sees that dog,
right.
calls. And we never disclose that neighbor's information. Domestic violence, for the last 40 years of my life, every commercial we've been trying to promote, if you see something, say something. Now, if you see something and you say something, that neighbor who's been beating his wife is going to know within 2 weeks that it was you that made that call.
Right. So what sense does this make at all?
Well, this is not the only slide that doesn't make sense. I'm sure he's got more.
Yes, ma'am.
So, someone came to Watervliet Police in the past, they could call anonymously. So how is that going to be impacted? Are people going to be told, well, you have to give us your name because...
No. So the question is, people sometimes call anonymously. You don't want to give your information, you don't give the dispatchers your information, that's what we get.
We still have to turn over the call.
Well, we still have to turn over the call, correct? They're going to hear your voice.
Okay.
But if you say, I don't want to provide that information,
The police station, my name and number to come up on their display. So does the police
Potentially.
department then have to disclose that to you guys?
Right.
Well, there are other hotlines, crime tips and things like that don't require those things, but the point is, in those domestic violence cases, or those cases where the people who are reporting are neighbors, if I'm reporting on my neighbor and he hears my phone, the call, he's going to know it's me.
Right.
sir?
Yeah, that's if you have caller ID, you have to turn over the person's name that called that when you give the discovery.
So,
You have caller ID on your phone.
Yeah.
Anybody that calls you, it identifies, no matter whether you got blocked or not.
well, currently we don't have, our dispatchers have that information, and yes, they can see a caller ID. It's a little bit more advanced, but yes, that would be documented in
So,
dispatch.
in other words, there is no anonymous tips. That information is going to be provided somewhere along the line.
Potentially, sir, yes.
Okay.
So what if the victim is a minor? Does that information,
I understand your question. If the victim's a minor,
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Yeah, everything, we turn that information over now anyway.
to the,
to the defense.
Because you have to remember the victim is the subject of the offense, and so you have to turn that over anyway. Any medicals?
What if a minor makes a 911 phone call?
Minor's a witness?
If the minor's a witness, yes, that has to be turned over.
but the person being charged, would they ever get the victim? The minor,
If it's a witness, because understand that a person has a right to confront their accuser, so if you're a victim and you're a minor, all of that information is turned over. This law now requires that if you're a witness and you're a minor, that information has to be turned over as well.
Any other questions?
How do you convict anybody?
We're going to do the best job we can.
Okay. I understand, but
So-
you're tied.
So, we're going to talk about internal changes with our record processing. What's important to note here is we now, in the police department, we now have to capture digital files for what we're calling investigative files, in addition to the arrest files. So in other words, arrest files, if we go and we arrest somebody for stealing a Snickers bar from Price Chopper, we're already capturing that information, we're already generating that. It's pretty easy for us to kind of visualize that, or to do that. What is new for us, effective January 1, is if we go to your house for a burglary report, if somebody kicks in your back door and they go inside and they steal an Xbox, we have no clue who did it, you have no clue who did it. It's a legitimate burglary. Our officers have to go, they investigate that scene. Our detectives come out, they have very limited solvability factors. They don't know who did it. We walk away, we do our due diligence, we try to solve that case, but we have nothing. 6 months later down the road, we get a DNA hit on something, Or we find your Xbox in a pawn shop, and we are able now to track it down to figure out who did that burglary 6 months ago. Well, guess what? The new law says that all this stuff is retroactive. We now have to supply to the defense counsel the information from that original 911 call. When you called us 6 months ago to say somebody broke into your house, we have to give that to the defense. We have to provide them everything surrounding that case that happened 6 months ago. So we never did that. No agency in New York ever did that. We now have to do that. And that presented a problem for us because where do we store that information? How do we gather that information? How do we know what do we need to retain and what that we might make an arrest in the future? We can't predict the future. Nobody here knows what's going to happen 6 months down the road. How do we know what to do? How do we know where to grab that information from? So we had to think about that, and we created an internal, we created some rules within our department. We'll kind of quickly go over that. I'm going to breeze through this just so this is what we trained, this is what we taught our police officers within our department. So we came up with this term, an investigative file, and we told our cops that any call that there's an opportunity to make an arrest in the future, even if there's no solvability factors at the time of the call, we need to capture all that, we need to preserve all that discoverable material right there at the time you went out to that burglary call. The arrest paperwork is pretty much any supporting paperwork, any supporting evidence generated from the arrest. We're good with that. We can do that. It was the investigative side of things where we're having issues. So the best way for us to do this now in the digital age is to really scan everything and make it all electronic. So step one is really we gather everything, we scan it into our computer system. We create digital folders on our servers inside the police station. We make sure that all that stuff is put into a shopping cart, and we send it down to the DA's office through that fiber optic line. These are some screenshots of our internal server. A lot of it's redacted just for security reasons on our end. Our IT guys would have a big issue if they saw this on the screen right now. But you know, it's just the point of these slides is to show you that it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3, like we just had up there. There's a lot that goes into this, and some of our officers' skill levels with being computer savvy are ranging. You got some guys that really don't know, they can barely turn on a computer, and then you have some of the younger guys that can fly through this stuff. So really, this is it's challenging on many levels. So what our goal was, our command, yes sir?
Was there a cost associated with that?
Yes, there was. I have that at the end of the presentation. But so certainly, as with anything, electronics, it costs money. So we needed to put all this data on a server. We needed to store it in-house. Well, you know how much servers cost? A lot of money, to the tune of $10,000 just for one server. We don't know how long that server is going to last us because we don't know how quick we're going to fill it up. But we spent $10,000 just for one server. In addition to that, now we had to buy a new computer workstation. We had to buy a whole bunch of different things, and I'll have that at the end of the presentation to show you. So going back to the workflows, specifically with our agency, myself and the chief and the other command staff officers, really we wanted to limit the cops on the street, the burden that was placed on them to be compliant with this. We tried to limit them. It's nearly impossible. They are going to have to spend time gathering and preserving discovery material. Really, the burden falls on two different groups of people, our shift supervisors and our administrative sergeant. So when we look at this, our new workflows, our shift supervisors, the sergeants here in Watervliet, have to review all related material, all related paperwork. They have to create electronic arrest files. They have to ensure that all the discoverable material, so all that shopping cart is full. They have to ensure that preservation orders are sent out to other agencies. So we talk about body cameras, and we had this happen recently. We had an Albany County Sheriff's Department canine deputy came down and did a drug search of a car for us. But that canine deputy had a body camera. Again, to be compliant with discovery. Once that call was done and over with, we now had to send a message to the Albany County Sheriff's Department saying, hey, that deputy that came down to help out the Watervliet Police Department, we need that deputy's body camera footage. Can you send that to us? And now we're waiting. The clock's already started. We got 15 days, right, to turn everything over. We're waiting for the Sheriff's Department now to send us that body camera footage so we can dump it into our electronic case file, so we can dump it into our shopping cart and send that off. So that's what we had to create a preservation order to send out to other agencies. And this is really the, yes, ma'am.
Are there plans to increase the workforce to accommodate those needs? Because it seems like
Yeah.
there's very increased efficiency.
Yes, so the only way we can be fully compliant with this is we had to pull a cop off the street and make him do this job. This is a full-time job for an officer.
We have more prosecutors right now that are gathering paperwork and turning things over than we actually have spending time on the phone with victims. When we got this, when this bill was passed on, ironically enough, April Fool's Day,
It's not ironic, is it?
we spent 6 weeks, first of all, understanding what it was, and then applying best practices to what it is that we would have to now do to be in compliance. And all of this is happening while we're getting budget letters from our county legislature because we have to submit a budget every year. This year we submitted a budget requesting 30 plus additional people in order to conform to the discovery. Now, I can tell you right now, I don't have room for 32 people. I don't. We got 9. And we're thankful that the Albany County Legislature saw fit to help us. But the rest of this falls on the state legislature, so that's where we're pursuing our wants now. They just talked about workflow. Again, most people always seem to get lost in technology because everything is so easy, right? This is a workflow challenge. This isn't the only department that's pulling officers off the street in order to just do paperwork. This is every department in New York State right now. The complaints are the same. And just one other note for, because I see the mayor here. We had a homicide that occurred in Albany not too long ago, and you know, being a leader, and I know Charlie is a great leader and a community-oriented person. Being a great leader that Mayor Sheehan is, you know, she and the chief of police went door to door, canvassed that neighborhood, just talking to people, asking people if they have any, you know, trying to comfort people, asking them if they saw anything, trying to develop leads, but more of a community-oriented, you know, engagement. Well, that was 2019. In 2020, that mayor would have to submit her phone number and all of her information at every single door she knocked on and identify every single person who provided her with relevant information so that we can turn that over. That is just an example of where we are right now. And so when you're listening to us, I don't want it to sound as though we're just sitting here saying this is 85% of what they did was fantastic. It's the 15% that causes chaos that we're trying to get them to remedy at this point.
Hey, David, I just want to say that within the last minute, I got 2 emails from your chief assistant on discovery matters. So you're talking about workload and how much it's working. Your guys are still working at 7 o'clock at night.
Oh my God.
And Peter, so, and I'll just give you, I don't want to take up a lot of your time, and I also, we have a child care issue at home. So last week, out of the blue, we were told that we needed to get personnel records of the sheriff's deputies to turn over to defense counsel. And we're like, okay, wait a minute. The rule is that we have an obligation to review, to ask the department to review the personnel files of the officers, to ask for any founded reasons, any founded disciplinary issues, so that may be relevant to the officers' handling of the case, and then be able to communicate to the court and be able to communicate to the defense attorney where any founded issues exist or not. So that's a phone call. We pick up the phone and we call, and we say, hey, does this guy here have any, behavioral issues? Any, has he been disciplined at all? If the chief says no, that's what we're conveying back to the court, and that used to be perfectly fine. But we now have one judge in Albany County who's saying that we personally have to go through all the files of the police. And our position is, wait a second. You're now suggesting that the law of the state of New York is that if this guy comes to my office because he's arrested a rapist, that I have to first investigate him before I investigate the rapist? So this is how what looks good on paper is horrible in practice. And your chief was at the office just the other day with PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, because this is an issue that we feel we can't be dealing with alone. And it's an issue that collectively we all have to get behind and address and get a definitive answer.
So, do you have anything further?
So I understand there's new workflows.
Correct.
However, if you mentioned the budget, there's a new budget, I imagine, that will be coming up soon.
There is, if you're talking about a county budget, the county budget has been passed for 2020. And in that budget, so I have to do analysis, right, every year, like with this issue, and figuring out whether our entire county would be in compliance. We were the only group that sought more bodies, right? And I think what happened was, there's a lot of people who saw this didn't really appreciate the storm that was coming and decided to wait until it got here to see what's going to happen. So I can tell you that in my office, we received over $1 million in addition to the other portions of our budget that we received, right? So this is the first time in my 16 years in this office that we've received additional funding to the tune of $1 million. And the funny thing is, or not funny, but tragic, right? I know that if I had $1 million, that I could just go and look in my community to the areas where I'm experiencing the most amount of violence, and if I could take that million and sprinkle it in that community, we wouldn't even have the level of violence that we have. So instead of investing in people and communities, through this reform, we're seeing investment to expand the criminal justice apparatus. It doesn't make much sense to me.
So if I understand this correct, are you saying that the only logical solution is to take the cop off the street so that he can administrative duties?
I want to make it perfectly clear. So, Chris D'Alessandro, this guy, if this guy decides that he is going to go on a tear in Watervliet tonight, and he's going to club someone over the head, and we have an arrest of this gentleman, right? What all of this truly means is if we don't do the paperwork and get this process within the requisite period of time, this guy gets to walk and go home. So in order to prevent that, our first and primary objective is to deal with dangerous people and remove dangerous people from community. The chief of police, whose job depends on his ability to keep communities safe, he knows he needs to have more bodies on the street, but what is he supposed to do? Have more bodies on the street and watch the back end of his operation fall apart and cases being dismissed in court, especially the case of this guy who's hurt somebody? He's having to make the tactical decision to now take resources from the front end of his operation, which is patrol, and move it to the back end to be in compliance so that the cases that we already have with pre-existing victims don't fall to the wayside. It might sound like I'm angry or bitter. I'm not. What I am is sensible. And like I said, my fear is that the good things that were done with bail reform and with discovery reform, my fear is that the good things that were done are going to be washed away because of the results that we're seeing right now. And there is a momentum building, for people to look at this bill and change it.
So in order to be compliant, in order for us to not drop cases, in order for us to make that arrest and to build a good case for Mr. Soar's team to prosecute, yes. We did have to create a new position within the department, which meant that we had to move a patrol sergeant off the streets and into the station to become our new administrative sergeant. And you're going to see how that, well, here's basically what are the new tasks for our administrative sergeant. And you're actually going to see, I have a nice slide that kind of points to what he's going to be doing for us to help make sure that we're compliant with everything. So that's it right there in a nutshell. He's making, yes ma'am.
I'm sorry, you may laugh at me for asking this, but with all of these additional new responsibilities that you guys now have to do, have you been offered any additional state funding to meet all of these requirements?
Zero.
It's the chief that writes the check, so, or asks for
It's
the
the
checks.
largest unfunded mandate in the state there. And just to add to your point, your question about extra resources, moving the administrative sergeant, more than just moving this one individual off the street, it now takes 3 to 4 times the length to process a normal arrest. So that means that's 1 less officer, 2 less officers on the street patrolling proactively. So we only turn out 4 or 5 cars max. You know, so we had a crime scene last week. We relied on Manans, City of Troy, Albany County Sheriff, City and the State Police to come in just to help us. So this is the impact, real impact that we're having in our community. So this is one position, just to make sure that the administrative duties are done in regards to a case, but operationally, it's, you know, literally 3 to 4 times the length. It took an hour to process an arrest. It's going to take 3 to 4 hours now.
So to kind of piggyback off what the chief said, 2 nights ago, our patrol officers made an arrest for drug sales. They came across 2 individuals and they arrested them. It took them off the road for 4 hours just to do the processing. Then on top of that, our administrative sergeant came in the next day and has spent probably an additional 2 hours to finish up that discovery and send it off to where it needs to go. So it's a lot of time for our cops being off the street. That's 4 hours that they sat in the station to process that arrest and gather and fill that shopping cart. And then it took another 2 hours for the administrative sergeant to review the shopping cart, make sure everything was in there, and get it to where it needs to go. Sir?
The 2 people arrested were home before you guys were, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So those 2 people that were arrested, they were charged with non-qualifying offenses and they were released on an appearance ticket. They were home and our officers were still at the station at 2 o'clock in the morning writing on paper or filling out paperwork on it.
What about this gentleman that got arrested? And
Well,
you said you
let's be clear, he didn't get arrested, but I get you. He bludgeoned somebody over it, yes.
So he didn't get arrested? He's still free to walk?
I think he's going to get to the real
Yes,
insanity of
that's coming up.
this.
The bail reform is coming up very soon.
So if you have 2 arrests or whatever in one night, you get a lot of officers off the street.
Yes, ma'am. So we had a pretty significant call a couple nights ago. And like we said, we had to rely on our partners in the Manans Police Department, the Albany County Sheriff's, the City of Troy Police Department to come and help cover the city, basically, because our officers were tied up. So, yes, Alderman.
What are other communities doing? Like, if you're taking your police officers from them, like, what, because I know Troy is already short, so
Yeah.
what happens there?
So it's a mutual aid thing. When Troy needs help, we go over and we help them. Green Island, Manans.
Now, are they on the hook to give you all the information and they're like, fill out their all the paperwork too?
Yeah, absolutely. So we borrowed one of Troy's evidence technicians to come and help us on a case here, on a crime scene. That evidence technician from the City of Troy had to provide us with all of their information. We had to call Troy, get all their audio, the radio transmissions from the Troy Police on that case. So yeah, 100%.
This is insane.
Anybody familiar with the issue that happened at the Bounce House at Crossgates Mall? No. You remember that? It was a
The
big
video, there's a
melee,
video.
big fight.
Yeah.
Right, you saw that?
No, no.
It took 13 agencies to respond to that scene. So it's every body cam, every contact, every note, every stitch of paper. You know, you talked about pulling officers off the street. all of this work really translates to less people on the street, right? All of this work, and I'll close with this because I know you got a lot with, and we got to get home, but I just want to, the position that law enforcement executives are in right now is having to make horrible choices, right? That horrible choice could be, am I pulling my road patrol? In Albany, that horrible choice is, am I removing my beat cops in order to do this? Every single law enforcement executive is going through these awful decisions. I want you to also consider this. This isn't just applicable to your misdemeanors and felonies. It's also applicable to vehicle and traffic tickets, okay? So if a person gets a speeding ticket, you know, that officer has to go and do all of this paperwork, which before would have been, hey, here's your ticket, have a nice day, we'll see you 2 weeks from now in Watervliet. Now it's, I've got to give you all of these records for all of these instruments and calibrations. I've got to give you all of this, everything, recordings, everything, and we're not allowed to plea bargain until that stuff has been turned over. What does that mean? That means if that officer is going to be sitting there going, you know what? If it's going to take me 2 hours to do a speeding ticket, I think I'm letting you off with a warning today. All right? What does that mean for Mr. Patricelli? It means less income from your vehicle and traffic and state dollars because you're not writing these things. Right? That's the critical decision that a lot of towns and communities are having to make right now. Thank you very much. This is great.
Thank you, sir.
Chief, thank you.
Can we just give a round of applause to David?
Yes, ma'am.
This also seems like an opportunity to promote the Census 2020 to ensure that resources are in place going forward. So I don't know what department that might be, but I would just suggest that you carry that information forward.
Thank you very much. Chief, did you get that? I'll make sure, I'll make a note, we'll talk about it. Do you mind sticking on afterwards? If you're going to be around for a minute, we'll talk.
Briefly, I also have a child.
Me too. Okay, great. So I'm going to fly through these next couple slides, kind of get us back on where we need to be here. We're talking about investigative case files. So remember that burglary at your house, somebody kicked in the back door, they stole your Xbox. Well, this is our internal workflow now to make sure that we're compliant with that. This is what we taught our police officers. So we have our paperwork. We have the initial report. Our cop went out there, they interviewed you, they took that paperwork, and they took that report. Now we're going to turn that over to the on-duty supervisor. Our sergeants are going to review that information. They're going to do a bunch of things. They're going to capture, they're going to make sure the report's accurate. Then they're going to kick it off to our training sergeant. Our training sergeant reviews all of our reports for and identifies any training needs for our agency. The best way to kind of see, there's a word for it, I can't think of it right now. The best way to determine whether or not our guys need additional help or training, our training sergeant looks for that in our reports. So the sergeant reviews a report. It gets kicked down for an operational review. So now I review every single report that comes across into the police station, and I ask the question: does this require an investigative case file? I ask the question, is this going to be something that we can make an arrest on in the future? If no, if it's just, hey, somebody, tripped and fell and we're documenting that incident because it happened on city property, then we're going to put that information up in our records department. It's going to kind of sit in our records file indefinitely. If yes, if it is that burglary case, and maybe, 6 months down the road we do make an arrest on it, what I do now is I kick it to my admin sergeant. And my admin sergeant then sends out preservation orders to make sure that we get everything in compliance with discovery. So when we talk about arrests now, we go out and we arrest that kid for stealing a Snickers bar at Price Chopper, that person. Our cops on the street are going to process the arrest. They're going to send out preservation orders. They're going to get everything they can about that arrest. Our supervisors, the sergeants that are working with our cops, on that shift, they're going to approve every report. They're going to create that electronic case file. They're going to download our video systems. They're going to send out what we call it 245 notice to the DA's office. We're going to send a notice to the DA's office that we made an arrest. They're going to make sure that court gets all their paperwork, and then they're going to submit the hard copies of all their paperwork. And it's going to go to the admin sergeant. And then the admin sergeant receives, we have to have somebody receive all this information. We sent out requests for audio. Well, who's going to receive that? It's going to be the admin sergeant. We sent out a request for that body camera footage from the sheriff deputy. It's the admin sergeant that's going to receive that. And then the admin sergeant really is the person that is responsible with transferring, with sending that shopping cart to the district attorney's office. We didn't want to give that responsibility to everybody in the department. We wanted to give that responsibility to one person for just to make sure that that person, we wanted to make sure that only one person did that. So here's what it looks like for an arrest. If we go out and we make that arrest, the cop on the street does all of his paperwork. It goes to his supervisor. The boss then makes sure that the court gets what they need to get to prosecute, or the court gets what they need to get to handle the arraignment. The sergeant on the street notifies the DA's office through an email that we made an arrest, and then he kicks that report to that training sergeant. Once the report review gets done by the training sergeant, it comes to me. I take a look at it, and I kick it to the admin sergeant. The admin sergeant then sends that shopping cart to the DA's office. Then he sends everything else to our records department just to be kind of stored in-house indefinitely. So that's that in a nutshell. And here we go. This is why you all came. We're going to talk now about bail reform. Again, lots of questions on this. I know it's a hot topic. I'll try to answer them as best as I can. We are in uncharted waters, so I may not have the best answer for you, but I promise you, if I don't have an answer, I'll get you one. So, effective January 1, judges can set cash bail only for qualifying offenses, and we're gonna define qualifying offenses in a minute. For non-qualifying offenses, all forms of pre-trial bail is abolished. And really, unless a qualifying offense is charged, we have to release them. So we don't have the authority, the cops, we don't have the authority to send somebody to jail. It's on the judge, and the judge now can't send people to jail unless certain criteria or certain qualifying offenses are met. So prior to January 1, this is what we were able to do. A police officer can make an arrest, and we were able to kick the guy loose on an appearance ticket, or hold the guy for an arraignment, or ask for the person to provide bail. We can't do that one part anymore. The only thing that police officers can do now is essentially catch and release. We can catch the bad guy and kick him loose, or hold them for the judge. The only way we can hold them for the judge is if there are qualifying offenses met. Understand that? All right, great. It also, all the way to the back.
Why are there families on there as non-qualified?
You have to ask the state legislatures.
And they're non-violent, bullshit, they're non-violent. I heard people that they're not violent. They are violent offenses. Manslaughter?
Yeah.
Come on, are they made from the legislature here that will say this?
I'm not sure. Yeah. Ma'am, I don't know. I feel your frustration. We're certainly frustrated with you. I don't know. You'd have to contact the legislatures that voted on this and ask them that question. So one of the things with this new reform is it also changed, if a bad guy didn't show up to court, there are now new rules that a judge has to follow in order to revoke their release status. And essentially, in the past, bad guy didn't show up to court, well, a judge could issue what they call a bench warrant to say, hey, the next time a police officer comes across them, bring them in, I want to see them. That's now changed. Bad guy doesn't show up to court. Now the court has to delay the warrant for at least 48 hours, and the court has to make an attempt to notify the defendant that they missed a court date. Yeah. I'll let you guys draw your own opinions on that, but that is what the law is now for our court, or for our, that's what the law is. So, in addition, if a bad guy doesn't show up to court, a judge has to hold a hearing to determine whether or not there's clear and convincing evidence that while released out into the community, that the bad guy did either persistently and willfully fail to appear. FTA stands for fail to appear. That the bad guy willfully failed to appear after the court told him, hey, you missed a court date. If the bad guy, while he was released, violated an order of protection, the judge can revoke their original release status and send them into jail or ask for bail. If the bad guy, while on release, intimidated any witnesses, or if the bad guy was released on a felony and committed another felony while he was out in the community, then a judge can release their revoked status. Questions on this? So even though bad guys didn't show up to court, there are strict rules that the judge has to follow before they can issue a warrant and order a police officer to have that person return to court.
Sounds like we're giving the bad guy all three opportunities.
Okay, we take your passport.
I gotta stop.
So if Ellen assaults me.
Okay? If Ellen assaults you,
And she assaulted me and she gets arrested, she gets the low bench warrant and she gets let out and she says, Lynn, I think you did the first time. Hits me again.
yes ma'am.
Does she now go to jail without bail or does she just say, sorry, you know what, now next time you really need to come?
Well, you're looking at two different things. You're looking at the secondary arrest. If that met a qualifying offense, which we're going to go over right now, then a police officer can order that Ellen gets held until they see the judge. All right? Or if you look at Ellen's already released on something else and she assaults somebody else, I just went over it. If those things are met, then yes, she would get revoked and sent to the jail. But it doesn't sound like any of those things are met. So Ellen would be released again.
It's like going fishing, catch and release.
Yes, ma'am?
But even if they are met, the judge can still let them go, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've all been doing it.
So police officers can hold someone for an arraignment. Now remember, we can only do two things as police officers now. We can only issue somebody on appearance tickets, or we can only hold somebody for an arraignment. So in order for us to be able to hold somebody for an arraignment, one of these conditions must be followed. One of these conditions must be met. The person must have an arrest warrant. So in other words, if they did something out in the community and they got away, they robbed a bank and they got away, and they weren't arrested right there and then. But we watch the surveillance footage and we realize, oh, you know what, that's Ellen. I know that's Ellen. And I go to the judge and I say, hey, Judge, Ellen robbed that bank, and here's the evidence that Ellen robbed that bank. Well, the judge can sign an arrest warrant for any police officer to arrest Ellen for robbing that bank. So if that happens, then if a police officer comes across Ellen, I can hold Ellen in our lockup and she can see the judge. All right? I don't have to release her on an appearance ticket. Yes.
But is that only if she showed a gun, if she gave a note, does she get held?
You're getting into the nitty-gritty. I'll cover that in my next slide. Yes. The other way we can hold people is something we call a summary arrest. So if I catch Ellen in the act, she walks out of that bank with a gun and the money, and I catch her right there and then, she's going to get charged with robbery robbery in the first degree, which is, I think, a Class C felony. Well, yes, then I can hold her to see the judge, because I'm allowed to hold somebody for Class A, B, C, and D felonies. There's a little asterisk next to that, because if somebody was arrested for burglarizing a dwelling, which is, I think, a Class D felony, that I cannot hold somebody on. That's what that, other than Berg's second, I can't hold somebody for burglarizing a dwelling. I cannot hold somebody for robbery second, which is if you rob somebody and you're aided by another person. So if two of you go into the bank and you rob somebody, there are no guns involved, you just go in, pass a note saying, give me all your money, and you walk out of there. I cannot hold you for that. I have to catch you and release you. The other part is we call any 220 section. So 220 in the penal law is any criminal possession of controlled substances. So if I arrest you, you can have a lot of drugs on you. I have to release you. I can arrest you for selling drugs. I have to release you. You can have a whole bunch of crack cocaine in your pocket. I have to release you. That's what happened 2 nights ago. Our police officers arrested somebody they had a lot of cocaine on them. We had to release them. We were mandated to release them on an appearance ticket. There are over 400 offenses that are mandatory releases. Yeah. So there are some Class E felonies that we don't have to issue appearance tickets for. I noticed with this legislation, a lot of the sex offenses, actually most of the sex offenses, are mandatory. We cannot release you. We have to have you see a judge. So for instance, any of the rape offenses, anything involving children, it allows the police officer to hold that person to go see one of our judges. Any offenses that involve witness tampering or witness intimidation, I don't have to release you. I can hold you. Any Article 130 offenses, which is sex offenses, are mandatory, or not mandatory. I have to hold you, or I can hold you, I apologize. I can hold you on any sex offense charges. I can hold you if you conspire to commit murder. So if Ellen says, I'm going to go kill so-and-so, and we arrest her for that, I can hold her to go see a judge. Or if they conspire with somebody, they work with somebody, so please don't do that. Money laundering in support of terrorism. I don't have to kick you loose. I can hold you. Criminal contempt first and second. So criminal contempt is orders of protections. So if a judge orders so-and-so to stay away from so-and-so, and there's an order of protection, a valid order of protection in place, if you violate that order and a police officer arrests you, I do not have to release you. I can hold you to see the judge. So some stuff in here involving children. If you have so if I arrest a person and they have a warrant from another agency, so if I arrest somebody for stealing that Snickers bar from Price Chopper, and they have a warrant from the city of Troy, I don't have to release you. I can hold you to see the judge. If I arrest somebody and I run their criminal history and I look and I see that they have something that's called a failure to appear, meaning they didn't show up to court previously at any court in New York State. If they didn't show up to court previously, I can hold that person now to have them see our judge. This is good, right? If I can't identify the person, I can hold them. That was actually sensible. Yes, sir.
That actually says that the failure to appear within previous 2 years.
Correct.
So if somebody didn't go to court 3 years ago, you have to let them go?
Correct. Any domestic violence related arrest, I don't have to release you. I can mandate that you see I can hold you to see the judge. And there's a whole bunch of charges in the domestic violence section that our officers are aware of. And any orders of protection. So the way this reads in the law is that as a police officer, if I arrest a person and based on the facts of that crime, and I reasonably believe that if I bring them before a judge, that the judge is going to issue an order of protection because of that crime, then I can hold that person. So, in other words, we'll go back to Ellen here. She's really a bad person. I gotta keep my eye on you. So if Ellen bops somebody on the head with a steak or something silly, and but she seriously hurt somebody, right? Ellen gets arrested. She gets charged with a misdemeanor assault. Just a very low-level assault, we'll say. It's a misdemeanor. I'm mandated to release her on an appearance ticket, right? However, there is something built into the law that says, hey, if I'm a police officer, I think that the person that Ellen assaulted, when I bring that, a judge more than likely is probably going to issue an order of protection, then I can hold Ellen and mandate that she sees a judge before I kick her loose. Does everybody kind of understand that? Okay. This is kind of if we arrest somebody and the crime that they committed is something that the judge can suspend or revoke their driver's license as a result of that crime, I can hold them and bring them before the judge. So this comes into play with DWIs. So if we arrest somebody for a DWI, generally the person's license can be suspended right there and then after arraignment. So I can now hold that person and have them see a judge. And then if I arrest somebody and let's say I believe that they might need a medical or a mental health evaluation, I can hold them as well. Now, that's all the qualifying offenses. That's it in a nutshell. What's important to know is I'm not mandated to hold anybody if they meet those qualifying offenses. As a police officer, I can release somebody on an appearance ticket. I don't have to hold them. So if I do have that domestic violence victim or a domestic violence case, I don't have to hold that person. Generally, our officers they are going to hold them, but the law allows a little bit of discretion on the officers whether or not they're going to hold somebody. Any questions on? Yeah, I knew this is. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question. If you do hold someone to be arraigned, they cannot be arraigned without an attorney present. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, the defense attorney needs to be present for all arraignments.
So it creates a problem, especially in the middle of the night when you make an arrest?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, but there is an on-call public defender. We've had to make arrangements to have somebody arraigned in the middle of the night. We do it, unfortunately, we do it all too often. Judge Reiferd's in her room. She knows when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's us. It's generally not a good thing, but yes. Yes, sir.
So, you can't take somebody that you catch the drugs out and hold them for a medical issue, meaning that they need to get out of their addiction?
I think that's beyond the scope of the intent of the law, so I would say no, unfortunately.
It's true.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
When you order appearance ticket, okay, when you release the person, how soon after do they come back to the court?
Steal my thunder. It's coming up. Yes. So if we arrest somebody and they're not charged with a qualifying offense, so those 19 things I just had up on the board behind me, if they're not charged with that, the judge, if the judge thinks that they could be a flight risk, then the judge can't set monetary bail. But there's other things, they call them alternatives to incarceration. The judge can do other things with that person. Generally can't send them to jail, but a judge can set something called electronic monitoring, ankle bracelets. If they meet that criteria, they can assign probation, so that person will have to report to probation either weekly, daily, bi-weekly, or as needed. So there are some things to do to help monitor criminals in the community. But jail is not the option. Just get that. So generally the presumption, when we make an arrest, the presumption is a person is going to be released. The law does say that. That's how we trained. It's our police officers. That's how the judges were trained. That's how all the attorneys were trained. The presumption is that everyone we arrest is to be released unless those qualifying offenses were met.
when you release somebody, you said that they had cocaine on them?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you release them?
If they had cocaine on them, do we release them? If you had more than $75,000 worth of cocaine on you, yes, we have to release you. If you have $75,000 of cocaine on you, we hold you. That's the rule. Any small amounts, it is mandatory release. We have to. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We just experienced that 2 days ago.
Yeah, I mean, what good is that? They're letting them out.
You keep the cocaine.
So we talk about appearance tickets. So the new appearance ticket rules that came out with this, and we're almost done here. The appearance ticket rules that came out, we have to make the appearance, we have to order that person come back as soon as possible, but no longer than 20 days from the issuance. This presented a problem not for our court, because we run court Monday through Friday. It presents a problem with smaller courts, like the Village of Manans, for example. The Village of Manans only runs criminal court once or twice a month, the entire month. Well, in order to meet that 20-day deadline, they now had to add additional court dates to their calendar. Additional court dates means that now police officers have to work those days to do court security and things like that. So the impact for smaller courts are much larger. Fortunately for us, this doesn't really impact the city of Watervliet, fortunately. So this is built into the new law. The criminal procedure law requires that the court has to send appearance reminders to the defendant for their upcoming court dates. You know how like you go to the doctor's office and they call you up and say, hey, reminder, you got an appointment coming up, or they'll send you get it for your dentist, they'll send you a postcard, hey, you got your 6-month checkup. Well, now our courts have to do that as well. They have to remind you that you have a court date coming up.
So what if somebody's homeless?
No, that's a very legitimate question. If somebody's homeless, a lot of times people move, especially some of these court cases can play out for months or for years. Unfortunately, yes, it is the responsibility of the police officers to gather their information at the time of arrest, to include now email addresses, and we have to provide that over to the court. If the court doesn't have a valid address to send them those letters, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So we talk about some of the things that we have to do now is we had to generate a whole bunch of paperwork to make sure that we're following everything we need to follow. This is just an example of what our 245 notice looks like. I'm not really going to get into it, but preservation orders, so hey, that sheriff deputy that came down with that body camera footage, this is the paperwork that we sent to the sheriff's department saying we need a copy of that. Audio. So Albany County is the one that dispatches us. They're the ones, when you call 911, it goes to them. So if I need that audio, I got to fill out a form for Albany County and send it to Albany County. If I need audio from anybody in Rensselaer County, I got to fill out that Rensselaer County form and send it off to Rensselaer County. If I need audio from the New York State Police, I got to fill out the New York State Police form and send it off to the New York State Police. The point of this slide is that there's all these different forms, and now our officers have to know which ones to fill out, where to send it to, and get it there and get it done within that 15-day time period. So here is our last couple slides. This is really everything in a nutshell, how this affected us specifically with the Watervliet Police Department. We had to create that administrative sergeant position, which means we had to pull a police officer off the street and to make sure that everything was, that we're compliant with discovery, with these new rules. That spot is still currently vacant right now. We needed additional office space, which meant that we had to buy furniture, we had to buy a computer, we had to install a phone line, we had to make sure that we had computer access, network access in there. That cost money. We had to purchase a server to the tune of $10,000 so that we can store all of our digital evidence. We had to do department-wide training. We had to bring every single police officer in and sit down with them and go over a very similar presentation to this, which again, we had to bring them in, unfortunately, on overtime, which cost the city money. We had to install specific cameras in our station that the district attorney's office actually paid for to help us. We had to get a document scanner. We had one, but we needed a newer one because the one we had wasn't sufficient enough to be able to take the workload. Again, we went to the DA's office and they provided that document scanner for us. They actually bought it for us, which was nice. We had to create several new forms and train our officers on how to use those. We had to create a point of contact for discovery demands, so which meant we had to now create an email. We had to establish a new phone line. We had to have somebody monitor that email. We had to have somebody answer that phone line. We had to delay our approach right now for body and dash cams. I know it's a priority of our current chief here to look at body cams for our department. Unfortunately, because of this, we have to delay that now because we got other priorities that we have to focus on. And we had to change our internal workflow with traffic tickets. I didn't even discuss traffic tickets with you guys because that's probably another hour-long conversation on that, but that's that. So the fact of the matter is, we're going to fail. And I'm standing here before you saying to you that it is inevitable. We, as a Watervliet Police Department, are going to fail on a case. But falling down doesn't mean that we give up, right? We have to do our best. That's what we're training our guys. I showed this slide to our guys because it's frustrating. We're in the trenches. We made that drug arrest. Our guys are still at the station and they're watching the bad guys walk out the door and they're there until 2 o'clock in the morning doing that paperwork. It's frustrating seeing that. Fact of the matter is, we still have a job to do. Our guys are going to get that job done, and we're going to work through this. We're going to plow through this and make sure that we can provide the best service that we can provide. So, with that being said, that's the end of my presentation. I am 14 minutes over, which isn't that bad. So, I want to open it up to questions right now, and Chief, if you don't mind joining me.
So how
Yes, yeah. So, we'll start off in the front and we'll kind of work our way in the back. Yes, ma'am.
How are we going to get this out? I know they're trying to repeal some of it or whatever, but are we in the process of maybe trying to make it a little?
So this was a fact-based presentation. We try to keep our opinions out of this so that you can form your own opinions. I don't know if you want to.
I guess the only advice I could give to you is, contact the legislature and those legislators that, voted for this.
I mean, I'd like to see it on the streets.
Yeah, I agree.
And support the people that are already doing things about it, like Tedesco. He's got, what do you call them? Petitions out there. There's a lot of petitions out there and there's a lot of groups to join. I don't know how many people in here are on Facebook, but there's a repeal bail reform.
So
Facebook.
The statement that was just made was that there are petitions out there and there are Facebook pages and other social media pages out there to gain support to try to repeal some of these. So thank you for that. There was a question? Yes?
How about security to make sure no one hacks into all that data so that cases aren't thrown out if there's ransomware or anything like that? That's one of the things I just didn't see out there.
Right. So, we already have an infrastructure in place, and we have a contract with a company called Capital Region IT, and they are very good at protecting our data. So, from my standpoint, I don't have any concern there. It's always an ongoing concern, but I believe there are safeguards in place. But good point. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question on if you were a witness. I know you said you'd be giving the name to the defense, but what about, I thought someone had said your address as well. So I don't know most of my neighbors' names. I'm sure they don't know mine, but that would affect your whole family if your address.
Oh, absolutely. Name, address, phone number, yeah. And that's part of this conversation.
Yeah, so we do have to turn over all the information we know at the time. So your name and address, if we have it, we have to turn that over. So, yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, yes, sir.
With all the extreme additional paperwork that these new regulations have placed upon the police department, do you foresee a tax increase in the future for the citizens of Watervliet in order to justify a pay increase for your staff and your individual officers?
So our officers have a contract that's good through 2022. So I don't see any wage increases. However, I do see a need potentially for more people, more police officers. In that case, then yes, there would be a potential tax increase if there's additional manpower.
One other question.
Yes.
I appreciate the presentation, and I got a lot out of it.
Thank you.
But the one thing I did not get out of it, how does this provide for a safer Watervliet community?
So that's a question I'm going to leave to hang in the air. I can't answer that. I really cannot answer that. But like some of the analogies that were made tonight about we only needed an aspirin and we took a whole bottle and some of these other analogies. Look, I agree with the district attorney. Reforms needed to take place. But stakeholders need to be involved. What I mean by that is police officers, police executives, probation officers, judges. Judges lost a tremendous amount of discretion in this process. And you know what group we didn't talk about tonight? And then I mentioned on the news interview, and I don't know if they'll play it, victims. Victims and victim services were forgotten in this legislation. And that's really what our concern is, trying to make our community safe and focusing on that. So I wish I could answer that question, but this legislation did not consider that. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier, you mentioned a committee, which was my first time hearing about that as a resident, so I don't know how that information got out. But is it reflective of the community in terms of socioeconomic status, ethnicity, gender?
So the design is, the answer is yes. The established committee right now, the answer is no. So I am looking for other people. So I would love to talk to you offline afterwards. And if you are interested or somebody in the community that you know, then absolutely. But I would love to let you know exactly what the representation is. And a lot of the information that we provide is through social media. So as you walk out, there's some rack cards that announces Nixle, Facebook, and Twitter. But that's how we get a lot of information out, through social media. But I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, sir.
Are you going to be able to continue as you do putting mugshots of people you release? Are you going to be able to continue that, or isn't that against the legislation?
There are some. Are you guys leaving now?
I gave him my business card, Chief, so we're...
Okay. Yeah, make sure you contact us.
Okay, well, good.
Thank you. So yeah, there is some legislation about releasing mugshot photos, but we continue to practice. If there's a
law enforcement need for it, then the legislation allows us to do it.
So we still continue to practice.
We interpret that as us being able to do that.
Yes.
So you got sex offenders that are still up on screen?
So that's different.
Yeah.
The sex offender registry is different. I think you're just talking about the mugshots.
Yeah, like the two that were arrested for the drugs.
Right.
I got that email.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the press release, yes, sir.
Yeah. There's
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I have a lot of questions. I can keep you here for another 3 hours.
So we're going to keep, I am a bug about time. We started right on the dot at 6 o'clock. We're going to end at 8 o'clock, so we do have 10 minutes, but we'll stay here afterwards, absolutely.
Okay, so a lot of what I've seen tonight seems to offer protections and accommodations for criminals who have broken the law. I don't see a lot of protections and accommodations for any of the victims or the other people who are involved in reporting crimes. So one of my questions is, how is the public going to be made aware of these statistics that are going to come out of this no bail reform with regard to criminals who are being released, reoffending, being arrested, and re-released again back into communities to further commit crimes and victimize more people? Where is that information going to come from? How are we going to be made aware of it? Where can we access that information?
So you see that every corner of the state, and if you're on social media, you see every day there's a news story about someone who's constantly reoffending, who's been arrested, released, and they commit a similar crime or a worse crime. So that's one way you would get it. In our community, like, we do use social media quite a bit, and that's our medium to get information out. So if you see something here, that's probably the place you're going to see it.
So there's something called a uniform crime report, I believe that is issued quarterly. So will this information from these people that are being released and being reoffending be included in that uniform crime report?
No, so the UCR is, I'm not familiar with quarterly, it's yearly, and the FBI publishes it. We provide that information to the state and federal government and DOJ. So that's how the UCR is Part 1 crime index and Part 2 crime indexes. So that information will not be captured.
Will not?
Will not.
That's unfortunate. Okay, so my next question is to you guys personally, and I wish that Mr. Soros was still here because I really like to pose this question to him. I'm on social media all the time, and Sean can attest to that because he sees me there and I see him there. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of outrage in the public over this, and I can tell from the way you guys are talking tonight, you're not very pleased with this whole thing either, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't. There are protests going on, there are petitions being passed around. So my question to you guys, and maybe this is a personal opinion I shouldn't be asking you, but as citizens, other than contacting our legislators and complaining that we don't like this, what can we do that will make an impact, enough of an impact, that's going to force some changes here? Because from what I've seen here, there's some good components to this whole criminal justice reform, but there's some really bad components that's causing a lot of harm to law-abiding citizens. So what can we do? There's got to be more than just signing a petition or showing up at a protest that really aren't going to accomplish anything.
So these are laws that were passed. They were passed, unfortunately, in the budget process on April 1st, but they were laws, and they are laws on the books, and we took an oath that we have to uphold these laws. So we are compliant. We're not happy about these. We're not happy about a lot of laws that we are forced to enforce. You know, you think there's going to be one case that's going to be a shock value to maybe the people that didn't think of these unintended consequences. You know, when I say people, I mean the state assembly. And you saw one the first week. You had a child, a 41-day old child that was murdered. And the person responsible for that child's death was released. So I can't answer that question. I hope it's not a method, but I hope that there's some common sense repeal to these reforms.
I can answer the question.
Yeah.
When's election day?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Sorry. Personal opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
Great answer.
And probably this might be Mr. Petroselli, sorry. But are the local politicians here living in the city, are they doing something to go against, you know, what this is, to Green Island, whatever? Are you guys like rallying against this and trying to change it?
But the only one that can change this is the legislature. It's the only people that can change what's happening here. And we've reached till we're blue in the face. I don't know what else to do, but I can't emphasize enough. Everyone in here, you get everyone to call there. They all have telephone numbers. Call. They have to document every call that comes in. Voice your objection to this. One of the simple things they can do is take all the VAT and everything out of this. I mean, that's crazy that you have to do this kind of stuff. I'm upset because we're taking guys off the street in Green Island.
Well, I mean, at least it's nice to know that you guys are frustrated because, you know.
Very frustrated.
So I will answer your question, though, to give the mayor credit. Before he took office as mayor, he was a councilman, as many of you know. And in an open meeting, at a council meeting, he asked me on the record, should we pass a resolution, should the city pass a resolution in opposition to these reforms? And at the time, I said no. And the reason why I said no is because I do agree there has to be reform. And the problem with law enforcement, people that look like me, dress like me, the opposition refer to us as hate mongering. And they turn it into something that it's not. So it's such a larger discussion than simply passing a resolution to oppose reforms. And I didn't want to get lost in that message. So I will give the mayor credit where credit's due. They did offer that. And if a community speaks and you want to see that, I'd be open to change my opinion. But I think this is much more meaningful, having these community conversations, than just passing another resolution saying we oppose this. I think.
And the kind of piggyback, not to interrupt you, Chief, but again, law enforcement believes that there needs to be reforms. You're not going to talk to a single police officer, district attorney, lawyer. We all believe that there needs to be a change in this stuff, but not to this extreme. And if you're going to do this, then you need to be able to make sure that there are systems there to help stand this stuff up. So I'll use the example, I know we're 3 minutes ago here, but raise the age law came down the pipe a couple years ago. So raise the age, we raised the criminal culpability for offenses. It was at 18 years old, I'm sorry, it was at 16 years old. We raised it to 17 years old, and then we raised it again to 18 years old, and that's where it's currently at right now. So if you're 18 and up, you're treated as an adult. When we did that, when the legislatures did that, they allowed an 18-month period for when they enacted that legislation saying we're going to change this. And then they gave 18 months for probation to get prepared for that, and for police officers to get prepared for that, and for the court system to get prepared for that. Then they waited another year to get prepared for the 17-year-olds. They allowed time, and I think that's what we were looking for. And they funded that. That didn't come down the pipe for this. They did this in a couple months, and we're talking the biggest reform since 1970s.
I'm sorry, Sean, yes, sir.
Chief, I just saw, somebody asked about the taxpayer impact, and D.A. Soares mentioned he asked for 30 positions. I was at the table and almost fell off my chair. That was at a cost of $4 million. And we could not, that would be a 5% increase to your county tax for that alone. That doesn't include probation, the sheriff department, software, and every other mandate that we get at the county level. So that's somewhat the impact at the county level. And that's your smallest tax. The city's been hit real hard with this, towns and villages.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Mayor, did you want to address the crowd? I know there was a question posed to you.
We have the same concerns as everybody else has. We know that there needs to be some changes and some obvious changes, and it's impacting not only the police department but everybody else. So we're looking at it very closely. We know we supported some of the needed equipment and some of that material that we have, but quite honestly, we're very concerned about the future costs for it and the impact it's going to have over the protection we have here in the city itself. So we're looking at it. We're working. I've been in contact with Assemblyman McDonald, and he's very aware of our concerns, and we've been talking about it a lot. So I think he'll hear it, and hopefully he'll have some changes.
Thank you. And thank you for your support on everything thus far, Mayor. Last question.
I think you mentioned it, but was there no law enforcement involved in putting this together?
There was no law enforcement, probation, parole, judges, victims. There was zero discussion.
I have no idea how it works. Maybe it's victims themselves. Unbelievable. Okay.
So, yes, Mayor.
Well, one of the things that's so silly about this whole thing is when you're arrested and you give the information on how you want to be contacted about your court date, would you like to be called on your home phone, your cell phone? Would you like to be faxed? Would you like to be emailed? Would you want text? That's absolutely ridiculous.
You want dinner?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all the bad guys have all the rights.
Yes.
The victims, we're going to have people not reporting crimes.
Yep. Right.
We're going to have bad because they don't want to get involved in it. We're going to have people who are actually victims that aren't going to report crimes because they don't want to get through this. We're going to have cops that
so people appear.
all that stuff is bad.
So it is 8 o'clock. We are going to conclude the forum. I do want to thank Lieutenant Brian Strock for an outstanding presentation. Like I said, I truly appreciate David Soares being here at the District Attorney's Office. You see how passionate he is. He's been a real supporter of what we're trying to do here. And most importantly, I know there's better things to do in your evening, so I really do appreciate the fact that you're willing to come out and engage in this community forum. Without you, it's only a forum. So thank you very much.